Um, I got my scar when I was small. I was about 6, and I'd gone to work with my dad. I grew up in New Guinea, pretty much on coffee plantations when I was young, and I went to work with my dad, and he was fixing an industrial coffee grinder, and it wasn't grinding. That's what I like to preface to people beforehand. And yeah, basically I stuck my finger in a bolt hole, and yeah, it just got sliced off. The weight of the machine just kind of, concrete plank was getting dropped in there, concrete slab, I should say, and yeah, the weight of the thing took my finger off. I mean, I don't really think that my scar has affected me too much in a really negative way, because I feel like I just was so young, and it was obviously I lost it in an accident. I wasn't expecting for me to come home with cut off the top of my finger. But it's not really been a huge adjustment in life in terms of the way I live or anything like that. It's just been, I remember when I first came home from the doctors, it wasn't even stitched. It was literally just so clean that they just put a band-aid, like a bandage on it, and they just I just had to keep it clean because I was living in a tropical environment. But yeah, I remember coming home, and I remember trying to get on my bike the very next day after sort of the painkillers had worn off and whatnot. And I remember my mum coming outside and shouting at me because she wanted me to go back inside, because my dad, who I'd gone to work with, I guess because he thought he wasn't watching me or whatever when it happened, he was traumatized. That's probably the person who it affected the most, not me. It was my poor dad, because to see a little kid covered in blood and not know what's bleeding, because the ends of your hands just kind of piss out blood. To see that, it's kind of a shocking sight, and it really traumatized him for a few weeks, and then even now I kind of see him look at it, and he just kind of shakes his head, and he's like, oh bub, can't believe you did that. So I feel like it hasn't really affected me at all. I think the most interesting thing about when I tell people about my finger, or when they notice it, it's mostly when people notice it, because I forget all the time, and it's mostly when people notice it, is just the way they react, and I find that has kind of inspired this project, is the fact that scars are something that people so often think you have to hide them and you have to cover them up, and it's a flaw, or it's not something that's the ideal. But I think whenever I kind of show someone my scar, or it comes up, it's really interesting to watch them kind of also offer up their own little story, or their own little vulnerability, I guess. And it's a really interesting way to connect. I think people will find the second you kind of show someone, oh yeah, I fell off my skateboard and I got this, or this happened to me, and I've got this mark from it. It's sort of, someone will then interject and be like, oh, that's happened to me, or that happened to my auntie or uncle, or just my brother or sister. It's one of those things that people, it's such a catalyst for sharing and for connecting, and I think that that's really interesting, and especially when it comes from a more painful or traumatic experience, where I don't think that mine was so much that traumatic or painful. Of course, in the moment it was, but for people who have scars from big surgeries or big injuries, I always think that opening up that conversation is really interesting, because you really do get to find out a lot about that person. I guess when I see my scar in the mirror, it doesn't really bother me, but being a model, I have found it is really interesting to have people kind of notice it on jobs or whatever, and it's I remember one of the very first test shoots I went for, I didn't even think about how like having a, you know, missing top of my finger would be a problem, but you know, this photographer said, oh, that's going to be a really big issue, so you know, you've got to kind of watch that. And I feel like that was kind of, you know, a little bit of an insecurity. Like I would go into castings thinking, oh my god, like is someone going to notice my finger? But honestly they don't. Like I shot a whole commercial for Cheerios, and that basically like you know, it was, they had me eating cereal, and the only thing that I had to do was like, oh, if we're going to shoot it from that angle, I just have to use this hand, and that was it. Like it wasn't a big deal. And that was sort of the time where I was like, oh, no one fucking cares, like, you know, it's not a big deal, like I was wrong. And I just, you know, if need be, I just stick a little nail over the top of it, and it's hardly noticeable. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of preposterous to me though that in the fashion industry that little things like that, or the beauty industry, little things like that are still seen as so you know, damaged. And they're not. They're human, and we are human, and we're not, you know, if you want a mannequin to model something, then go and get a mannequin, you know, with all its limbs and bits and, you know, totally unscathed. But if you want a human, we're gonna have to get used to seeing like humanness, like, you know, our marks and our, you know, our signs that we've lived and we've existed, you know. So when people show me their scars or, you know, where they've been hurt, I feel like, to me, it really shows where they've come from, you know. Like I was saying to someone, you know, you can actually, there's a guy in New York City, and he gets on the subway and he's really horrifically burned, like really burned. And you kind of, you know, it's actually shocking, like, you know, to see this person get on. You think, oh my god, something awful must have happened. And then he carries this sign that says that he's a vet, and like that he was burned, I think it says that he was burned in service or something, but basically he gives a little bit of context to what has happened to him. And, you know, from something, when you look at someone and you think, oh, it's shocking, you know, and so I'm sure some people think, oh, it's ugly, like, you know, and it should be hidden. Like this whole person, he's, you know, got no ears, and like he's really, you know, just his whole face is completely disfigured. Once you kind of get that context, you're like, oh my god, like you are actually like inspiring. You're amazing that you are, you know, living your life with such, you know, you obviously, you know, I think with him it kind of, it might sound terrible, but he's just found the will to get up every day, and like, you know, and I think in our society so often that's not encouraged, you know, when people are, you know, we're supposed to so often hide when we're not perfect, or hide the bits that about us that aren't perfect. And I feel like, you know, anytime I see somebody who I think is just got a remarkable story to tell about some sort of way that they look, I think it really does change, you know, the way you see them. You know, what you might have thought was, you know, like I said, some people might have thought it was ugly, you all of a sudden think they're inspiring and superhuman. So I think that's pretty incredible. I think scars are amazing, like little bookmarks on our body, you know, showing the chapters that have been lived. They are signs of, you know, perseverance, or a fight that you've had to get through, or some, you know, some way you've had to live to, you know, be the person that you are today. So I think that they are wounds that were once open and now they've healed, and you know, that's such a amazing thing that you've been able to live through something, and now you have a mark that you can show people, or, you know, that you can remind yourself just, you know, what you had to survive. I think that's pretty amazing. So often I think that scars are thought of as like, you know, a weakness or, you know, a flaw, but it's actually, they're signs of strength. They're signs of, overcoming and living through something. So I think that that's kind of amazing, really.